Hi, Kat here for Lightwave Digital. When you're working with characters or any other types of objects or scene items that have various ways of being displayed, it might be handy to have more than one viewport up and have different viewport display settings for each so that you can more easily digest and mentally process a scene. For example, when I find myself confused when I'm working with a heavily boned object and I got a lot of stuff in the scene, I'll actually go to one viewport and turn absolutely everything off that I don't need to see in it, so I can get a good idea of where I am, and it helps me to figure out what to do as the next step or problem solve as I go along. Now, it's great to have these kind of technical views of Lightwave layout, either from a perspective view or from a top. Let's center that. Left, bottom, back, right, even from the light view, a specific camera, or even the schematic view, which will give you a diagram of how something is structured out in a scene. Now, this is something that most people don't even like to look at unless they're character animators and they're doing rigging, because they can see the relationships of what everything is linked to. Now, I rarely use this viewing mode, but it is there for you if you need it. Let's go back to perspective view here, and let's just demonstrate some other functions of the layout views for options and viewing things. Of course, in this view right now, we have an option called X-ray or bone X-ray. So we can see the bones through the mesh no matter what display mode we're working with. So let's say, for example, I was in wireframe here and we're over here. I can very easily see the bones if they're selected. In wireframe doesn't work very well because they're kind of the same color tone. So you might want to work with shaded solid, which essentially just drops the texture maps and displays everything else very, very quickly, but still gives you that X-ray mode. Well, you can see whether or not a bone is distorting a mesh inappropriately, but it reacts faster and therefore is easier for you to get instantaneous feedback. Another good viewing mode is texture shaded wireframe. This will give you an idea of what the wireframe mesh is doing when distorting with bones, or if you need to see a selection. And it really helps you to understand what's going on with the mesh topology when being manipulated by a bone. Now, another great viewing mode, obviously, is VPR, but depending on the speed of your system, it's going to be a little slower to react with for doing this type of work. Now, I generally like to work in one shaded solid and then, of course, either wireframe or front face wireframe. I can still see all the bones through the mesh, but they're not colored highlighted all over the place, and I can just focus on the one item. But there's also another mode in here that you can look through, and that is bone weight shade. Bone weight shade is extremely handy, so you can see exactly which weight associated with a bone. In this case, left shoulder bend is associated with weight map left shoulder bend, and we can see the representation of that bone's influence over the mesh. Whenever you change selections, it'll follow it, and it becomes incredibly handy for viewing things when working in these two types of modes. So you can see exactly what the influence of that bone is over the mesh. Oops, that's going to be 360 weirdness. As you can see, it's very, very handy to work in that kind of mode. And depending on the speed of your machine, you'll get better feedback. But I find that most graphics cards today, especially if you're working in a shaded mode, will handle it wonderfully. This bone weight shade mode does take a little bit more time computationally, but you can see that it's very quick and there's really no lag on my end here other than possibly the screen recording software that I'm working with now. But this is a really great way to take a look at what bones are doing for the mesh, the distortion, the influence of the weight map associated with the bone, and to see if the topology of an object is following appropriately. So that's another quick tip for you on how to work with Lightwave layout in Lightwave 2024.1.